I was a very good barefoot rock climber. Yeah. It was really weird because it started once I forgot my climbing shoes. It was winter here in Minnesota. We went to Red Wing. Red Wing is known as it's very vertical, and that means it's very technical. It means you're standing on very thin edges, and that's not the type of rock that you would climb barefoot usually. Usually you want to climb something steeper because steep rock typically has more edges and ledges, things that you can stand on. So it's not so technical from a footwork perspective. But Red Wing is very technical from a footwork. It's very hard to climb barefoot. And then, so I forgot my shoes and I didn't want to go back and go to the car and get them. So I was like, oh, I'll just climb barefoot today. It's fine. Not a big deal. And so I did this one climb and I was like, oh, look, that wasn't so bad. That's pretty cool. So then I set the goal of like doing everything on that wall in a single day, which like very few people can even do that with like rock climbing shoes. And I was like, I'm going to do this whole wall barefoot. And then it was cold too. So it was like brutally painful. Cause like, you know, when your fingers get cold, you get the barfies when you get the heat back. It's the same with your toes. And then you have all the pain that goes with it. But I ended up climbing the entire rock wall, like all the lines barefoot. And I was like, I've mastered this crag. It was like the first time I was like, I've truly mastered this place. I didn't need any, because there's no equipment then. You're like, shoes or equipment. I was like, oh, I can just bare hands and feet climb this wall. Like, that's pretty cool. Then later in life, or not later in life, but like in later seasons, we would go to these other crags and I'd always set the challenge of like, what's the hardest thing I could climb here barefoot? So I got to be pretty good at climbing barefoot.
So then, has that ever inspired, like, you look at a building and you think, I'm going to climb like this in the movie? Like, you can just climb the building?
No, buildings aren't interesting to climb. They're really repetitive. It's the thing. Like you look at that wall, that building right there. You would climb those vertical cylinders, those pillars, right? And it would be the same move over and over and over and over. And then you'd reach up, you'd grab the next ledge, you'd do a mantle, you'd do the thing over and over and over. You'd grab the big metal edge, flip over, and so it's just very repetitive. It's not like rock climbing on a cliff where the thing I enjoy about rock climbing is the complexity of movement and how you have to move your body in very interesting, intricate ways. On a building rather, it's not like that. It's just do the same thing over and over and over and over and over. And it looks a lot scarier to people than it really is. But like
that's what's kind of blowing my mind right now. You're looking at that like it's such an easy math problem, effectively.
I mean, technically from a rock climbing perspective, right? We look at that from a technical difficulty perspective, and it wouldn't be technically difficult.
And how does that translate to business? Because that seems like a very powerful concept to understand.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess I haven't really thought about it before, but I mean, there's a lot of things in business that I think people believe are technically more difficult than they are. I think just generally people think business is more technically difficult. And that's the case for most people when they look at a rock wall for the first time. They look at it and there's certainly a spectrum of difficulty, but usually what the layperson perceives as difficult is very different than what is actually difficult to the master, right? It's the same with really any sports, not just rock climbing. Like you watch a professional tennis player, they make everything look so simple, so easy. But there's certain things for you as the observer in your position as a beginner that you think, oh, that looked crazy what he just did there. That was insane. And then he's like, well, that part's not so hard, but this other part that was much more subtle, you didn't even notice it. He's like, that part was really hard. And so there's like this nuance of understanding true difficulty. And so for the most part, most non-entrepreneurs overestimate the complexity and difficulty of a business. But then once you're in business, there are certain things that are complex, but that people even in like as they're building, and this is why they struggle to scale it, they don't understand the complexity. So like when you ask somebody the hardest part about building a business, you know, some people may like, how am I going to get customers? What kind of product am I going to sell and all that stuff? Anybody that's been in business for a long time, for any period of time, they'll probably come back and be like, no, the hardest part is people. Like how to hire people, how to find good help, right? Like how to get like the people side of it, right? And so it's the perception of difficulty isn't what people tend to think it is, especially like, and that's why like looking at climbing a building, you'd be like, oh, that's not technically that difficult. Not for the reasons you think it would be difficult.
Yeah, I see. And that sounds like also something that would explain why a lot of people feel a lot of resistance just starting things in general.
Yeah. Well, you think about like the perceived, again, like building a business, I think there's the perception of the difficulty, but the reality of the difficulty is much more mundane. And so non-entrepreneurs, they put a lot of value into the idea. Like, this is $1 million idea. And because they think that's the important part, they think that's the hard part, is to come up with a great idea. But the reality is just actually the hardest part is sitting down every day at your computer in a meeting and doing a lot of stuff that doesn't really feel productive, or like doesn't feel like it's moving balls forward. It's answering all the customer support emails, right? It's responding to leads really quickly. And there's these little glimpses of like, oh, we made a sale, huzzah. But it's like, yeah, that feels like the big victory, but there's all the other things that nobody saw leading up to it that was actually the hard part. And so that's how I think about it. Same with rock climbing. Same with any sport. Every activity really has a certain level of complexity that can only be understood as you ascend in your competency, right? And this is why this is the Dunning-Kruger Effect in a nutshell. Which the Dunning-Kruger Effect says, people who tend to be over average at an activity or a skill tend to undervalue how good they are at it, whereas people who are under average tend to overvalue. Right? They tend to think they're more competent than they are. And the reason that is largely that as you get better at a thing, you realize just how much more nuance and complexity there is in the activity itself. And so you can see finer gradations of inputs. Whereas when you're beginning, you're just like, oh, I just need to get a lead. I need to close the lead. I need to do this. And you're like, you can only see things in these blocks. And then the master can see the thing in the blocks, and they can divide it down into like 1,000 sub blocks. And they go, ah. And as they can see more sub blocks, they start to go, I know that there's more sub blocks, but I don't even know. I can't even see them yet. But they start to realize, because they've continually been surprised at each level to realize, oh, there's more here. There's more here than I thought. There's more here. Because after a certain point, you go, man, there's more here than I thought. That's the 7th time I've said that. I'm guessing there's probably more here than I thought than I'm thinking right now, right? So
it seems like the difference between the master and the amateur is simply an understanding of nuance in context too, but.
Yeah, well, I think the big difference between a master and the beginner is their level of understanding of subtle differences, of like understanding that there's a depth and a complexity inherent in something that looks simple. So the beginner looks at something that looks simple and says, that's simple. The master looks at it and says, here's all the complexity that goes into making this thing look simple.
That's a huge paradigm shift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's really hard. Einstein said, make things as simple as possible, but no simpler. Simple and elegant is incredibly difficult. Like, simple and elegant solutions require complex thinking. Yeah. And as soon as you realize that, it's like, because like, again, going back to the rock climbing analogy, you watch somebody who's in the flow state, a master at their craft and what they're doing, and it looks so effortless. It looks so natural. It doesn't look like they're thinking about it. But if you were to stop and ask me at any point on a climb, what are you thinking about? It might be very, very, very few things. And yet my body is intuitively doing 1,000 incredibly complex things. And so if you were to say, hey, what are you thinking about right now? I'd be like, I'm thinking about applying pressure to the foot right here and getting my hips into the wall. And I'm thinking about not over gripping, right? But if you were then to come level in even closer and you think, okay, tell me now tell me why you put your right hand here. It's like, oh, I put my pointer finger on this spike because that little nub bites in and it gives me a little bit more bite. Now, other people, they would usually put their middle finger here so that then their pinky and their ring finger can rest on this ledge. But for me, I find that if I put my pointer here and I put my middle and my ring finger on the ledge, I now have my pinky available to hook around this other side. And that gives me this little pinching effect, right? Most masters of their craft can get to that level of nuance and detail about what they're doing, but they don't have to think about it as they're performing it. But they know it's there. Whereas the beginner doesn't even know. They just grab the thing wherever they get it, they go. Right. Same with the football player. I'm sure is like when they grab the football to throw it, they're not thinking about how they're grabbing it to throw it. But if you ask them to give you a master class on like, where do you put the pressure? Why do you grab it this way? Like, I don't even know how to throw a football. So like, I don't even know what they would tell me, but I'm sure it would blow my mind to be like, holy crap, you're doing a lot of stuff there that I never even processed. It's the same in business. So there's like levels to this game.